Hey you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. Today we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorites, a guy I enjoy reading about and learning about, and one of my favorite guys to talk about. He went from driving beer trucks to become the beer baron of the Bronx. And to get the ground, he used extreme violence. He put together a gang with an arsenal tough enough to take over a small country. And behind the scenes, he played a big role in the creation of the modern mafia. At least one of his staff gunmen was responsible for the demise of Salvatore Maranzano in his office. He went to war with some of the most dangerous gangsters of his era. Guys like Legs Diamond, Vincent Mad Dog Cole, Bumpy Johnson, and Pretty Amber. He was targeted by Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey. Seeing that he couldn't beat Dewey in court, he decided he would have to handle Dewey like he handled everything else, with violence. And that would ultimately lead to his demise in 1935. I'm talking about Arthur Flegenheimer, better known as Dutch Schultz. But before we get into Dutch, I want to make an announcement. I have started a Patreon page where I can put all the explicit videos that YouTube doesn't allow. There are a lot of images I have that I can't show you guys, and I have to compromise, and I'm telling gangster stories here. Some things you can't sugarcoat. So to get the raw versions, you got to sign up to the Few Bad Men Patreon. The link is in the description. With a membership, you get early access to the videos and exclusive content. I have some of the old videos that I took down up there, and I'll drop some videos exclusively for the Patreon. The link is down below if you want to officially join the gang. All right, so let's get into this. Arthur Flegenheimer was born on August 6, 1902, at 1690 2nd Avenue on the Lower East Side, to Emma and Herman Flegenheimer, a pair of German Jews who came to the U.S. a few years before. The Flegenheimers were not observant Jews, and growing up, Arthur never set foot in the synagogue. Arthur was the only child. His father worked at several occupations. He was a glass fitter, a baker, and later he opened and operated a livery stable before running off on his family when Arthur was 8. But as an adult, Arthur would never admit this. He would tell the people that his father was dead. Arthur's mother moved him around New York before settling in the South Bronx, where Arthur attended PS 12. He stayed there until the 6th grade when he quit school to help his mom at home. Now, little side note. All right, Arthur's principal was John F. Condon. He was the man who, in 1932, would toss the $50,000 over a fence to ransom for the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. All right, so I just wanted to toss that little thing in there for all my history buffs out there. All right, so unlike a lot of gangsters of his era, Arthur actually tried to live a straight life. He sold newspapers and discount L to subway transfers at the station. He was an errand boy, and when he got a little older, he worked at a print shop, and he also learned how to lay roofs. But at 17, Arthur would get his first pinch. The first of 13 he would accumulate over his career. Arthur was found guilty of unlawful entry and was sentenced to Blackwell Island. Arthur had a bad time at Blackwell Island, and he was transferred to West Hampton Prison Farms. Arthur had 2 months added to his sentence after he and a few other youths escaped from the prison farm, but were only free for about 15 hours before they were captured. When Arthur came home, he had a new name, Dutch Schultz. Now, there are a few stories floating around on how Arthur got that name, Dutch Schultz. One story is that he borrowed a name from a 19th century tough guy by the same name. And another one is that Dutch Schultz was the name of the son of his employer at a trucking company. But seeing as Dutch didn't have an honest job after he came home, I don't see. But you know, you be the judge. Anyway, by 1920, Arthur Flegenheimer would be known on the streets as Dutch Schultz. Dutch began hanging out at pool halls and at the Bergen Social Club near Old Yankee Stadium. By this time, he was already running with a tough crowd that included Thomas Fatty Walsh, who would go on to be a bodyguard for Arnold Rothstein, and a tall young blonde kid named Vincent Cole. It was at the Bergen Social Club that Dutch met a guy named Marcel Parfo. Parfo was only a year older than Dutch, but he already had an extensive police record. Parfo shaped the young Dutchman into a lifelong criminal. Parfo and Dutch would steal packages off of the back of delivery trucks, stick up crap games, and break into stores and apartments. On one of those nights, Dutch was caught in the middle of cleaning out a Bronx apartment in 1921. This case was apparently dismissed because Dutch never did any time for it. In 1925, Dutch became a sheriff's deputy, but not really. He was able to get his hands on a sheriff's deputy badge from a crooked sheriff named Edward J. Flynn. The badge allowed him to legally pack a ride, and he would need it, because by 1925, Dutch was working for the Gas Brothers as a truck driver. Up until Prohibition, the Gas brothers ran a legitimate trucking business. But they soon realized, like a lot of other truckers at the time, Harlem booze was more profitable than Harlem milk. The Gas brothers went into business with Legs Diamond to transport his booze, and Dutch was acting as muscle. On March 9, 1926, a fight broke out in one of Legs' speakeasies. When the cops arrived, Dutch was one of the handful of people still there. The cops found his iron, and his deputy status was revoked. Dutch worked for Legs Diamond until 1927. In addition to being a bootlegger, Legs was also a dope dealer. And a gang leader from the Lower East Side named Lil Augie Organ was looking to diversify his criminal portfolio. And he wanted to add dope as his new venture. He struck a deal with Legs, and on the evening of October 16, 1927, Augie and Legs met on Norfolk Street. After taking a few steps, someone called Augie's name, and shots rang out. Little Augie caught a bullet with his forehead, and when Legs wheeled around and reached for his piece, he caught 2 under the ribs. Legs managed to get himself to the hospital, and little Augie made his way to the morgue. While Legs recuperated, Dutch and a pal named Joey Noy decided it was time to make a go at being bootleggers. Noy's father was employed as a pipe cleaner at a beer brewery. And when they ran the numbers, it made sense. In 1926, a barrel of beer cost $3 or $4 to make. Distributors bought it for $8 or $9. By the time it got to the speakeasy, it was $18 or $19. Joe and Dutch opened their first speakeasy inside of a tenement on Brook Avenue. From the Brook Avenue proceeds, they opened more speaks around the area. They used a beer distributor from New Jersey named Frank Dunn, who operated from Union City. Their next move would be to supply other speaks. They would send one of their men into a speak, and he would order a beer. And after tasting what the proprietor had to offer, he would spit it out and said, "This isn't fit for human consumption. You should get it from us. And if you didn't, us will be back, and us will bust up all your beer kegs." Dutch and Joey had an idea of monopolizing the beer business in the Bronx. But first they had to clear out a few bootleggers who had the same idea. The Rock brothers, Joe and John, were a pair of Irish boys who had been bootlegging in the Bronx for some years now. After a slight holdout, John decided to fold, but his brother Joe wasn't ready for retirement. So Dutch and Joey arranged for him to go out on disability. Joe Rock was snatched off the street and beaten to within an inch of his life. Then a gauze, smeared with the drippings of a infection, was placed over his eyes. After $35,000 was paid, Joe Rock was released to his family, wheelchair-bound and blind. Like I said, Dutch and Joey had put together an ensemble of psychopaths. Abraham Bo Weinberg, Vincent and Peter Cole, Joey Rayo, a Sicilian who worked in East Harlem with the permission of Cyril Terranova, Larry Carney, a known Bronx tough guy, Fatty Walsh, and Edward Fats McCarthy, a trigger-happy Irishman who would end up dead after a shootout with the police. But that's for another video. By the summer of 1928, Dutch and Joey had moved their operation from Brook Avenue to an office building on East 49th Street. They bulletproofed the walls with steel and installed a steel door with an 8-inch slot guarded by a man named Blind Sam, who was most certainly not blind. If you got past him, you faced the army. That year, Edward J. Flynn, the same sheriff who gave Dutch his badge, conducted a raid on the 49th Street headquarters. When they busted in, they found a 12-gauge shotgun, a loaded Tommy gun magazine, 2 brand new .38s, and 2 well-used .45s, fully loaded and equipped for silencers, and over 2,000 rounds of ammo. Neither Joey nor Dutch were on the premises. Now, I want to take some time out to thank our sponsor for this video. We're moving up in the world, guys. All right, with the winter coming on, the hawk is coming out, and you need to be prepared. So head on down to Seabird Limited. They're having a sale on fur coats. Go and get yourself a nice full-length raccoon coat for only 100 clams. Don't miss your chance. This is 1 week only. Okay? That's Seabird Limited, 7 West 36th Street, near 5th Avenue. Tell them the boss sent you. So, Dutch and Joey had the Bronx terrified. But one person who wasn't afraid was Legs Diamond. Legs had recovered from getting shot in 27 next to Lil Augie, and he was not happy about being pushed out of the Bronx. In the early hours of October 16, 1928, Joey Noy was standing on a corner outside their offices. He was waiting for Legs Diamond to show. Either Legs had some money for him or he had some money for Legs, I'm not sure. But Joey knew, and he was waiting. Being aware of Legs' treacherous business practices, Joey was packing, and he also had a bulletproof vest. For extra precaution, Dutch took a position in the window overlooking the corner. This happened to be the office of Big Bill Dwyer, and if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. All right. Around 7 a.m., a blue sedan pulled up to the corner. A man jumped out, and shots rang out. The man opened up on Joey with a Thompson submachine gun. Joey was hit 3 times, but was able to get to his own gun and return fire. At the same time, Dutch sprayed the roof of the car from the second floor window. The shooter ran back to the car and it sped off before closing the door, which they lost after colliding with a parked car. Even though Joey had on a vest, 3 bullets found their way home. Joey was hit in the lower spine, the right chest, and his index finger was blown off. A few blocks away, a blue sedan pulled into a garage. 3 men exited and told the attendant, let the man sleep off his drunk. A few minutes later, the attendant received a phone call, and a person told him to take the car to 12th Avenue D. And this is where police were called to after passers-by noticed what they thought was a dead man in the back seat. That dead man was Louis Weinberg, alias Benjamin Greenberg. He had caught a slug behind the right ear as he was trying to get back into the car. He too was wearing a bulletproof vest, but it did him no good either. In the car, police found a Thompson submachine gun and a revolver. Joey Noy was taken to the hospital. He was arrested for the murder of Weinberg and transferred to the Bellevue Hospital prison ward, where he finally succumbed to his wounds on November 21st, at which time he only weighed 90 pounds. Dutch had lost the only man he respected. The only man who could say, Dutch, that's enough. From now on, Dutch would have no partners. His small army went on to dominate the Bronx. And by this time, the government had all but given up on the enforcement of the Sullivan Act. By 1931, the majority of beer sold in the Bronx came from Dutch. It's remarkable that the Dutchman stayed out of the papers the whole time. It wasn't until January 24th, 1931, that the name Dutch Schultz first appeared in print. On that evening, Dutch and his entourage, including Marty Crompier, one of Dutch's top lieutenants, and Larry Carney, decided to head out to the Club Abbey on West 54th Street. The boys were drinking and having a swell time. As the night wore on, Marty Crompier found himself nestled against the bosom of a pretty young dancer. Everything was going great. That is until Chink Sherman walked in with his entourage. Chink was known as a drug man. He was in charge of the narcotics arm of Waxy Gordon's operation. Dutch has gone down on record that he had no respect for pimps or pushers. Being both, Dutch had no love for Chink. And it didn't take long for the hostilities to begin. Someone from Chink's crew, or Dutch's, accounts vary, said something to a girl in the opposing group, and all hell broke loose. A bunch of hard-faced men with bulges under their shoulders started yelling at each other. Then somebody killed the lights, and shots rang out. Dutch went down first. A .45 slug slipped past his bulletproof vest and got lodged in his shoulder. When the lights came back on, Dutch and his guys were gone, and Chink looked like he had been in the meat grinder. He had been shot 3 times in the nose, chest, and arm, and stabbed a dozen times with a broken beer bottle and beaten with a table leg. Chink's girlfriend, Mavis King, who was called the prettiest cigarette girl in New York, piled her mango gangster into the back of a taxi and got him to the hospital. When questioned, Chink said, "I'll handle it myself." He was not expected to make it, but he would pull through and be big in narcotics until he had a run-in with the boys from Brownsville a few weeks after Dutch. But that's for a video you're only going to get with the Patreon membership. Dutch retreated to the apartment of Fats McCarthy to recover. The cops got wind of this, but when they busted into the apartment, all they found was Peter Cole, Fats McCarthy, a sawed-off shotgun, a bloody jacket, and McCarthy's living girlfriend. Dutch strolled into a police station in April and said, "The name's Schultz. Dutch, you know, I heard you guys were looking for me." He came in with his lawyer and told the cops that Chink didn't shoot him. "In fact, I wasn't shot. I dare you to find a scar." When they brought him in front of Chink, he said the same thing about Dutch. Funny thing is, that night, Chink was carrying a badge that he was given from a Saratoga County sheriff, which allowed him to legally carry a piece. And at the table with him was an off-duty police lieutenant named Walsh. He was demoted to a beat cop after initially denying being present on the night of the shooting. Now, if you've been following the channel, you know that we've covered 1931 a lot. And with good reason. 1931 was the most pivotal year in the formation of organized crime. The air in New York was thick with lead. You had the war between Joe the Boss and Salvatore Maranzano. You had Abe Rellis and the Brownsville boys leaving Brownsville littered with corpses. And the Bugger Meyer mob had some issues with Waxy Gordon and his mob. Dutch's contribution to the carnage started when some of his workers got the idea in their head that since they were doing all the work, risking their lives, going to prison or to the chair, they were entitled to a bigger cut of the proceeds. The leader of these disgruntled employees was Vincent Cole. Cole and Dutch had known each other for years. Cole was a tall, blonde Irish kid, and by 22, he had over a dozen arrests, and he had a reputation for being one of the toughest hoods in the Bronx. The problem was, Dutch wasn't good with sharing. His only partner died in '28, and he wasn't looking for a replacement. His counteroffer to the Cole group was a raise, but no partnership. Cole told Dutch where he could stick his raise, and the two prepared for a showdown. Schultz was in for a fight. Cole was not the kind of guy who would come to a peace meeting, and he took some of Dutch's best guns with him. He had his brother Peter, Edward Polk, known as Fats McCarthy, Dominic Tuffy Odierno, Frank Giordano, Patsy Del Greco, and the Basile brothers, Mike, Lewis, and Fiore. These men had been arrested dozens of times for everything, including murder. In the spring of 1931, Schultz trucks began getting hijacked. On May 29, 1931, the Cole forces drew first blood. Joey Rayo was sitting in his car talking to two of his lieutenants, Dominic Slats Bologna and Frank Big Dick Amato, in front of the Parody Dance Hall at 164 East 116th Street. When a sedan pulled up and shots rang out, a Thompson submachine gun let loose on the trio. Amato went down instantly with a bullet in his head. Bologna was able to run to a nearby store where he collapsed and was pronounced dead on the scene. Joey Rayo's blood-stained car was found a few blocks later, but Joey was nowhere to be found. 2 days later, Peter Cole was sitting in his Cadillac in front of the garage at St. Nicholas and 111th Street. It was 2:30 a.m. when a man stepped out of the shadows and shots rang out. 4 shots plowed through Peter's window. He tried, but failed to put the car into gear, and he was taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. The lead flew the other way on June 3, 1931, when the bullet-riddled body of Louis DeRosa was found in the gutter in front of 211 Ryder Avenue at around 5 a.m. And he was shot 7 times from behind, 4 in the back and 3 in the head. Dutch made himself scarce around New York, but not before walking into the 42nd precinct in the Bronx and putting a bounty on Cole's head. He said he had 45 grand in a house in Westchester for any cop who escorted Cole to the cemetery. The desk officer on duty said, "Dutch, do you know what you're saying?" His reply was, "I know exactly what I'm saying." The officer yelled, "You gotta be crazy. Get your ass out of here before I have you thrown in a cell." Cole had Dutch shook. He holed himself up in an apartment at 1212 Fifth Avenue under the name of Russell Jones. Here he would meet with his lieutenants and run his business. Dutch was named number 4 out of the 6 biggest gangsters in New York, but he was number 1 on Vince Cole's list. So early in the hours of July 17, 1931, Dutch was in his apartment, and one of his guys was keeping watch at a window. They noticed 2 men across the street who looked suspicious. Dutch was on the highest alert, so him and 3 of his men, including Danny Yamasia. Danny worked with Dutch, but he was under Cyril Terranova. Dutch had recently expanded his empire into Harlem, and Cyril was the boss of East Harlem, and Dutch needed his blessing to set up shop. The men walked across the street and approached the 2 men they assumed were Cole men. Dutch barked, "Who are you guys, and what are you doing here?" But the 2 men were not Cole guys. In fact, they were New York detectives, Julius Salk and Stephen DeRosa. The men identified themselves as cops, and DeRosa pulled his gun and told the 4 to put their hands up. When Danny Yamaska reached in his jacket, shots rang out. Detective DeRosa let off 2 shots, striking Yamaska in the gut. Danny dropped, and the Dutch and the 2 remaining hoods made a run for it. Dutch took off and tossed his pistol in the gutter. He ran until a bullet whizzed past his ear, followed by a halt shot from one of the cops. Dutch stopped and gave himself up. At first, Dutch refused to identify Danny, but when the cop said, "You gonna let your pal die like this?" he said through tears, "That's Danny Yamasia." Dutch was taken in and charged with possession of a weapon. When the cops searched his apartment, they found more weapons. Dutch sat in the clink for a few days before he paid $75,000 cash bail, and he was released. On June 20th, Danny's girlfriend, Irene Comerford, jumped from her apartment window to her death after hearing what happened to Danny. Irene had divorced her husband and left her son with his father in Philadelphia. She went to New York to become a showgirl. That's where she met Danny. Danny Yamasia was sent off for the gangster's funeral, Fifth Ward boss. A procession of cars bearing flowers snaked their way through the Bronx behind a hearse that carried Danny in his $20,000 silver coffin. Dutch was down 1 gun, and Vincent Cole was still alive, so Dutch surrounded himself with some of the toughest Jewish triggermen in New York. At different times, Dutch had both Pretty Amberg and Charlie the Bug Workman on his payroll. On Wednesday, July 29, 1931, Joey Rayo was sitting on a stoop at 107th Street in Harlem, talking to his pals, trying to escape the heat. The streets was full of people, old and young, all trying to do the same. Then a touring sedan slowed as it came down the street. No one noticed the Tommy gun poking out of the rear window. Then shots rang out. Joey and his pals took off and miraculously evaded the fuselage of lead. When the car screeched off and the smoke cleared, Joey Rayo was gone, but 5 kids lay wounded in the streets. One of them, Michael Vangali would not recover from his injuries. Cole was labeled a baby killer in the press, and he dyed his blonde hair black, grew a mustache, and dyed that too. Then he made himself scarce in New York. Vincent Cole had become a major pain in the ass to the whole New York underworld. In January 1932, he was acquitted for the killing of Michael Vangali and was back in New York. But he wasn't present in a little apartment at 1216 Commonwealth Avenue in the Bronx on the evening of February 2nd, 1932. But two of his men, Patsy Del Greco and Fiore Basili, were, along with several others, including women and children. The women were seated at a table playing cards. The doorbell rang, and one of the kids went to open it, and two men burst into the apartment, and shots rang out. A Thompson submachine gun sprayed the room. Del Greco and Basili dropped dead, and so did Mrs. Emily Tanzillo, 35 of the Bronx. It was only hours after Basili and Del Greco were placed into the ground on February 7th, 1932. At 12:30 a.m. on the next morning, Vincent Cole walked out of his hotel and went across the street to the London Chemist drugstore to use the phone. He was not packing, but he had a bodyguard with him. Cole was on the call for about 20 minutes. Outside, a big sedan pulled up, and three hard-faced men got out. Two stayed by the door while one of the men went to the drugstore. When he came in, Cole's bodyguard got up and walked out. The hard-faced man opened his coat, revealing the Thompson submachine gun. Cole had his back turned and never saw what was happening. Then the hard-faced man opened up the Thompson on the baby killer with such precision that all but two shots didn't make it into Cole. The hard-faced man calmly walked out. His companions joined him, and they got back into the car and sped off. The Dutchman breathed a sigh of relief. And that's where I gotta leave you guys off today. All right, this is episode 1 of The Dutchman. Stay tuned for episode 2, where I get into the whole Harlem numbers racket, and I get into his trial, and I get into what happened at the Palace Chop House in Newark. All right? So if you're new here and you want to join the gang, you like what we do over here, you got to bump that subscribe button off. You got to break that thumb. You got to ring that bell, set it for all notifications. If you really want to make your bones, you can join the Patreon to get all the uncut versions of these videos with all the gory stuff that I can't show on YouTube. All right? So this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see yous in the funnies.